morning. This story begins in April of this year while I was in the US for the Coachella Festival, which was very cool in spite of a large number of reasonably rowdy foreigners. Oops, I just pressed the red button. I had a rental car while I was there. It was a Ford Mustang, as you do. It was a bit different. Steering wheel was on the wrong side. The price was right, and I got up to speed pretty quickly. I thought I was asking for trouble when I declined the GPS, but what ended up flummoxing me was filling it up. I'm standing at the petrol station. After already having taken a couple of stabs at parking beside the pump, which I won't mention, I look at the instructions on the pump for how to put the petrol in my car, but I can't make any sense of them. So I end up standing there, trying different ways of angling the nozzle into the car, sort of lifting it, dropping it, trying to make it go. Now that's not as strange as it sounds, because there was a diagram on the pump that sort of suggested the angle was important because of this sort of fancy vapor reclaim nozzle thing that they had. So after several minutes of standing there, nothing's happening. I have to go up and ask the rather nonplussed cashier, excuse me, how do I put petrol in my car? That was obviously the wrong thing to say. He didn't understand me. I should have said, how do I put gas in my car? But it turns out the pump's on prepay, so that's fine. I prepay, and I go back to my pump. I think, right, this is going to be good. It looks promising. The numbers have changed on the display. And I put the thing in, and I angle it correctly, and I pull the thing, and I think I can hear something. I'm sitting there sort of holding onto the pipe like an idiot, going, is there petrol flowing through this? Like the machine seems to be buzzing, but there was no petrol flowing. Finally, another customer pulls in, and I have to go over and ask them. And they say, "Hey, did you lift the lever?" So, in addition to the trigger on the handle, there's also a separate lever on the pump that has to be lifted in order for the petrol to flow. So I lift up the lever, the petrol starts going, everything's fine. I can relax, and then I reread the instructions on the pump. I look at these things again, and this time, the instructions, they make perfect sense. I can see the little diagram. I can, in fact, see it. It shows the little lever, and it says, you've got to lift this up to make the petrol flow. This didn't make any sense when I first looked at it. Now, to me, this experience feels very much like the experience of a developer starting with a new technology. You read the documentation, understanding a bit of it, but perhaps not understanding all of it, trying it out, failing, seeking some advice, probably on Stack Overflow, getting a bit further, failing again, seeking some better advice, and then finally succeeding. Also, like development, for pumping gas, there is further documentation available online. While I wasn't excited to be standing in the desert, being made a beginner again at filling my car, I do find that I'm excited and motivated when I'm a beginner with a new technology. One more thing last year. I presented at the mini conference and talked about Camera Plus, about the design process that we went through, how we promoted it, and the results that we'd had. 4 years on from Camera Plus's inception, 3 years from its release, 1 year from last year, and while I was preparing this talk, Apple announced the countdown to the 50 billionth app download on the App Store. In that announcement, they listed the top 25 all-time paid apps, and Camera Plus came in at number 7 in the United States. That was absolutely amazing. The top 25 is quite an incredible lineup. Camera Plus started out in 2009, started as an idea for a simple camera app. It grew into something a lot bigger, and it's taken me on quite an amazing ride. But later last year, I decided to move on from Camera Plus, and I'm no longer actively involved in the development. Since then, I've been thinking a lot about new beginnings and about the whole mobile industry. It moves so quickly, and we're in this repeating state of beginning again, starting new projects and learning new technologies. And it all just started a few years ago. In 2007, I was a beginner at iPhone development. I started with the Open Toolchain, which consisted of reverse-engineered headers, hacked-up libraries, a cross-compiler, a linker, and sporadic community documentation, often in the form of example code. This book was written by one of the pioneers in the Open Toolchain world. His example code and documentation I'd used while I was learning, and he put out this book. And unfortunately, by the time that the book came out, Apple had already released the official SDK, so the Open Toolchain wasn't so relevant anymore. Fortunately, they didn't choose a very popular animal, so it wasn't a great loss. But I remember those open toolchain days really fondly because there was such a thrill in exploring all these new APIs and frameworks as if they were new and uncharted lands. It felt like an explorer. And as a developer, there's always a thrill in learning, right? There's also fear and frustration, from being out of your depth and not really knowing what's going on. But mostly I find that it's excitement, enthusiasm, and motivation. When a developer is starting something new, we describe it as playing rather than working, right? I wasn't a beginner developer in 2007. I'd been programming for 20-something years, but I was new to Objective-C, I was new to Cocoa, and of course new to iPhone, and I spent hour after hour playing with my new toys. In fact, in January 2008, when I had my first child, rather than being a development liability, as I had anticipated, all those broken nights proved to be rather good random coding opportunities. I was so motivated by this whole new world that sleep turned out not to be a priority. 6 months later, on July the 10th, 2008, I was lining up on Queen Street in Auckland, waiting for midnight for my chance to buy an iPhone 3G and to see the opening of the App Store, in which my first iPhone app was anxiously poised for release. No one knew what the App Store experience would be like, as a consumer or as a developer. If you remember iTunes Connect back in those days with its retro aqua buttons and pinstripes, you'll know that it didn't exactly inspire confidence, and things kept on changing there. Suspiciously, I couldn't find a single screenshot of iTunes Connect to show you from that time. On Google, Internet Wayback Machine, or even after asking people on Twitter, does Apple's reach know no bounds? Although no one knew anything about the App Store, everyone was excited. We were witnessing the beginning of something amazing, an enormous new marketplace bursting with opportunity. Just look at this photo. The camera on the iPhone 3G was utter rubbish. But it didn't seem so that night, and I spent the whole night, didn't go to sleep for hours, just playing with the new phone and playing with the App Store. There was an amazing sense of discovery and an incredible urgency to stake a claim in it. I'm sure that anyone who was there at that time remembers feeling that way. A number of established developers, myself included, experienced a bit of friction at the beginning of the App Store. There was significantly less developer control than usual. You didn't have a direct relationship with your customers. You didn't have their contact details, you couldn't charge for upgrades, and you couldn't get updates out when you wanted to, and the prices raced to the bottom. Whereas, if you look at the Mac market, where there was already lots of software, prices had traditionally been respectably high, and developers had all of the control. But regardless of where you came from, the App Store was a whole new game, and everyone was a beginner at it. We weren't able to look to established development companies for wisdom or models or case studies. We had to create all of that ourselves. In established markets, people tend to be cagey about their sales figures and that sort of thing. But in the new App Store, people recognized that there was value in sharing and that we needed to have this information to grow this market. So some developers started posting their sales figures and analysis online. And one of the best was from local Melbourne company Firemint. This document came out in April 2009, and it covered the first month of sales for Firemint's debut indie game, Flight Control. So Flight Control was one of the first indie games to really take the world by storm. It hit number one in at least 20 countries, probably more. And what Firemint did is they showed us their sales figures and the resulting chart position in each country, right? So it was one of the earliest sources of that data that matched those two up. How much did you have to sell to get to this position? In fact, to get to number one in each country. So for example, if you look at the US or Australia or New Zealand, we found out that it took around 10,000 sales, 500 sales, and 50 sales respectively to reach number one. So come to New Zealand. We're soft touches. I met one of the Firemint team later that year at WWDC, as you can see. He was pretty thrilled to meet me. Also at WWDC in 2009, I joined forces with Tap, and this is when we started to create Camera Plus. I was apprehensive about taking on Camera Plus. I'd already written several iPhone apps, but this would be the biggest. And more importantly, I knew nothing about image processing, and this app was going to be all about image processing. It took us a year to build the first version of Camera Plus, and the learning curve was really steep. Oh, it's perfectly legible. That's great. So I'll give you a few minutes to study this. I studied image effects, right? So I went through, I read reference materials, I looked at descriptions of algorithms, I pored over open source image processing libraries such as ImageMagick. I found people who'd compiled details of the blending mathematics used by Photoshop, things like screen overlay, soft light, and linear light blending modes. I didn't actually even know what a blending mode was when we started this, but I had to learn all of these things and understand them because we needed them to build up our layered effects in the app. Some of the mathematics here was based on published information, things that Photoshop disclosed or things that were in the public domain. Some of it was reverse engineered just to match the results that Photoshop gave. And some of it was wrong as well, which was really troublesome. So I had to investigate those ones and correct it myself so that we could get the right effects, so that what we did in Camera Plus would match what you saw when you did those effects in Photoshop. None of it was fast enough. The iPhone 3G had a 2 megapixel camera, so that's 2 million pixels that have to be processed if you're going to process an image. And often they have to be processed several times because there's several stages in each effects process. The iPhone 4, which came out the following year, took it to 5 megapixels. So a lot of my time was spent rewriting C code to be more efficient. And once learning and then hand rolling some ARM assembly, as you can clearly see here. If you haven't coded in assembly and you get the opportunity, you should do it because it's awesome. Although I think it is becoming a little redundant. When I first wrote this code, it performed about twice as fast as the tuned C code compiled with GCC. That was a huge improvement. That was the difference between it taking 10 seconds to process an image and it taking 5 seconds to process that image. It was a huge improvement. That margin, however, reduced with LLVM GCC. And finally, with the Apple LLVM compiler version 3, not version 2, version 2 was worse. Version 3, the compiled C code was faster than my assembly code, so we threw the assembly code away. And that's a really important lesson in optimization, right? As if you're going to optimize something, you have to test it. You have to have tests to prove that your work has been worthwhile. And you can't just do that once. You've got to rerun those tests and make sure that your stuff is still better. You've got to retest it as the environment changes. All of this was completely new and exciting. At the time, there weren't many people doing photo effects or image processing, especially on iOS. And because of that, jumping in and being a beginner here at this time was great fun, and it also made really good business sense as there just wasn't much competition. The sharing of facts and figures about Camera Plus's experience in the App Store was part of the promotional strategy of Camera Plus. I talked a bit about that last year. This always produced great interest because there was still a shortage of this kind of information, this kind of data, even 2 years on from the beginning when Camera Plus was released. In our first year, we had a bit of a hiccup, and Camera Plus was removed from the App Store for 4 months. You may be able to spot that problematic period on this chart. This shows Camera Plus's sales for its first 12 months. This is a chart that was posted on our blog. Our return to the store happened just before Christmas, and it couldn't have been better timed. This is the sales for Christmas 2010. You can see that after returning to the store, there was an immediate jump. That's on the 21st of December. That's when we got back into the store. And then right on its heels, another jump for Christmas. Christmas each year has been really important. This is 2011. You can see the same kind of big jump leading up to it. And the same again in 2012. So we know that Christmas in the App Store is a really important time. Right? People are getting new devices, but I think more importantly, people are receiving iTunes vouchers as gifts, and there's this enormous big burning pocket effect. So if you can make a splash with an app at that time, then there's an opportunity to get it into the hands of a lot of people and to earn yourself a Christmas bonus. But Christmas is just one day. It doesn't build something that you can rely upon, something that you can call a business. So what's really interesting is the long-term effects. Going back to 2010, after Christmas, you can see that Camera Plus sales dropped away pretty quickly. They were still at a good level. There's definitely still a good level, but they weren't as good as they weren't as good as we thought they could be. And after you got a taste of Christmas, you wanted to be back at that level. So we kept working. And another couple of months later, we brought out an update with basically much improved performance and much more robustness. We fixed a lot of bugs. That's where this big spike occurred. I talked about this last year as well. People love bug fixes. It turns negative reviews into positive reviews. And reviews and ratings are critical to success. We see this time and time again reflected in our stats. Notice that this update also didn't just deliver us a sales spike, it also set a whole new base level of sales. And a few months later, we added a new filter called Clarity. So I'm really proud of Clarity. It was a huge development process. It was a lot of work, and there's a lot of tweaking and a lot of tuning that went into it. Part of our process involved taking hundreds and hundreds of photos that Lisa had shot and running them all through Clarity with different kind of settings and looking at them to see which settings delivered the best results across a whole range of photos. It's a really hard process, but it's a really fun process. And Clarity got us another sales spike, but like before, it also increased our base level of sales. So it kind of increased the intrinsic value of the application. It's all about increasing that base level. It's that base level that you see every day. Success on the App Store, it starts with marketing, and in a market of 800,000 applications, it has to. You've got to tell people about your app. They won't just discover it just because it's cool. But Clarity, wasn't just a hilarious promotional video and some hype. It actually was really good. It actually, technically, it was great. It did a good job of enhancing photos and producing good-looking and useful results. So what we experienced with Camera Plus was that longevity in the store was driven by ongoing innovation such as Clarity and by hygiene. We kept on updating, kept on keeping the app up to date with new things like iPhone 5 size. We came out really quickly with a new version for that. So to fix bugs, make improvements, that kind of drove longevity in the store for us. Internationalization was one of our most recent focuses. So Camera Plus sells all around the world. And that's one of the beauties of the App Store that we take for granted. Other industries, it is not this easy to sell everywhere. However, the US still accounts for about 50% of our sales, pretty consistently, month after month, 50% of our sales. So we undertook this rather large process of internationalizing the app. So finally, in April of this year, Camera Plus 3.8 came out with 8 localizations. We had German, Spanish, Italian, French, Japanese, Korean, simplified, and traditional Chinese. And we expected to see a sales bump in those countries on the basis of this. But we actually haven't seen a big change yet. The US sales have dropped below 50% of our total, but only slightly, right? It's like 47. I don't know. We don't know if it's significant. Time will tell with this one. I still believe that internationalizing an app will be a net positive. It feels intuitive that if you build it, they will come. But if we're going to be professional about this, let's not be unprofessional. Then let's not be haphazard. We use stats in Camera Plus not only for promotional purposes, for which they're really good, but also to guide us. When you try things like internationalization, measure the results. Check if the numbers reflect what you expected or hoped to see. You can use this to test alternative approaches and to learn what's successful for you and what's successful for your apps, and then to repeat it. So building repeatable models is where it's at. On Camera Plus, we looked at revenue from our in-app purchase. So we sell one extra effects pack. It tracks pretty consistently at 10% of our total revenue. So if you put the graph of sales, this is from the first, kind of that same period as one of those other graphs. If you match those two up, the shape of the graphs follows each other. It's just 10% down. Information like this suggests that you should add another in-app purchase, right? And see whether that achieves the same. We really should do that. A lot of apps prompt you to rate them. I recently added this prompt to a small app that I wrote called BirdBrain. I used a package called Irate. Now, how could you not use something called Irate? to solicit users for feedback. It's so brilliant. As soon as I saw it, I was just like, that's going in, and think about the consequences. And it was really easy to add to my app. It's it's available as a CocoaPod public service announcement. Developers, if you're not using CocoaPods, do yourself a favor and check it out. And the results from this are pretty marked. So I added iRate in version 2.6 of BirdBrain, and already I'm getting lots more reviews in a much shorter period of time. What's not reflected in this chart is that BirdBrain 2.6 has been out for a month or two, whereas 2.5 and 2.4, because I'm Slack, were out for about 6 or 7 months each. So this is really just a huge influx in people giving feedback, giving reviews, giving ratings about the app. And there's really good evidence that positive reviews, and particularly a high rating, are important for sales. It's one of the first things that people see when they browse your app in the App Store. If you look at the top 10, you often see that those apps are 4.5, 4.5, 5-star rated apps. I would love to see a tool that correlates sales per country with the star rating in that country. If anyone's seen a tool like that, please let me know, because I'd really like to use it. Of course, you definitely want to make sure that your app is relatively bug-free before soliciting reviews, as people do tend to tell you what they think, and it is good ratings that we're after. It wouldn't be an iPhone app presentation without sharing at least one review. This is one of our favorites from Camera Plus. Resolution very poor, not worth saving or publishing photos in any capacity. The app deserves no stars, 5 stars. The mobile industry that we're a part of, it moves so quickly. In April 2010, I woke up to Apple's iOS 4 announcement with over 1,500 new APIs. 1,500. Literally overnight, everyone became a beginner again. You had to dive in and learn whole new areas of the OS that had been opened up. And a few weeks before that, you thought you were good at developing iPhone apps. Let me try this. Boom. Say hello to iPad. Although it was often dismissed as just a big iPhone, there's in fact a whole new way of thinking required when developing for it. We started thinking about an iPad version of Camera Plus, and it took another 2.5 years before we had it ready to release. And Apple announced iOS 5 at WWDC in 2011. So 5,000 attendees at WWDC are at once confronted with all of this new stuff, all these new opportunities, all these new technologies. And the same happened again in 2012 with iOS 6, and presumably again in a couple of weeks' time. This energy and excitement from receiving those announcements and all being together, it makes WWDC an incredible experience and an absolutely exhausting week. This is symptomatic of the aggressive pace that's been set in the mobile world. Since June 2007, Apple have released 15 iOS devices, not counting the Apple TV, and 7 new major operating system versions, where I count 3.2 because it was quite a big change. And Android's experienced a similar level of activity, and with many more devices, and not to mention there's Windows Phone 2. So everything is iterating really, really quickly, and repeatedly being made a beginner again is the new status quo. We've become beginners on the business side of things as well, with big companies and small having to learn new technology and to adapt to the new and ever-changing market. The App Store's also spawned a number of brand new companies. There's much more of a level playing field on the App Store, right? Like rather than large companies having a big opportunity because they've got lots of money to throw into advertising and that kind of activity, the App Store itself is the dominant form of advertising for apps. This is what advertising is for apps. And best we know, you can't pay for exposure there. In November, let me do that again. In November last year, Finnish company Supercell, with just 2 apps, had higher monthly revenues than Electronic Arts, who had nearly 1,000. Independent developers are the darlings of the App Store. We have this advantage because we can more easily embrace change and we can adapt to these new business models. But new can be scary for everyone. If I'm pitching for contract work and there's a chunk of the project which is something I haven't done before, that's scary. I don't know how long it will take. I don't know how much to charge for it. I don't know how many traps there will be in there that eat a day or eat a week of my time. I don't even know if it'll be possible sometimes, and in the case of the iPhone, whether it'll be allowed. But we know that ignoring change isn't a good long-term strategy. If you're afraid of new things, then confront your fear. For me, I'm afraid of the swamp of new changes that come with each OS release. I'm really nervous about what might be coming in iOS 7 in a couple of weeks' time. It's going to take me from waking up in the morning as an expert to ending the day as a beginner in all of these things. But it doesn't take long to get a good overview of how something new works. And from that little bit of effort to look at the thing and say, I don't know what this thing is, let me try it, let me build a prototype. From that little bit of effort comes reassurance that when you need to talk about it or use it later, that you've got a little bit of knowledge. You're not out in the cold. Don't forget how great you can be when you're excited about something, when you're motivated about something. After years of doing web development, I found huge energy when I started developing for mobile. It was amazing to see software that I'd written running on a physical device, which sounds strange. A computer's not a physical device, but there's something different about mobile, seeing it running on this little handheld device, even when that device was a Sony Ericsson K700i. It's a crap phone. There's huge excitement and motivation in beginning things. So harness the power of your beginner. Keep learning. There's a wealth of valuable things to be learning in this space. So if you find yourself bored, you don't have to look far. And if you're doing the same thing over and over again, find new ways to do it better, then move on to something new. When I started working on Camera Plus, I spent hundreds of hours playing with image processing, looking at code, changing it, researching, trying new algorithms. Now I'm turning my attention to new projects. And it's hard. It's hard for an experienced developer to step out of their comfort zone. It's really hard for an established company with an existing business model. But it is wonderful to be a beginner again. Thank you.